All right. So we are officially into the wilderness, folks, and the people are gonna complain. So last week we heard some song, or not last week, 2 weeks ago, we heard some songs that the people were singing after the crossing, and then we heard the first complaint. And that was they were out of water and they arrived at the water source, but they couldn't drink the water, and they were like, help. And God came through, and it kind of wrapped up last time with God saying, if you will listen carefully and do what I say, I won't visit any of the bad stuff that I did to the other people back in Egypt. I won't do any of that stuff to you. So that was kind of the agreement set up going forward. And immediately we hit the next bump in the road. So I am curious, before we jump into the actual words on the page, what do you all think about this complaint? So last time we heard about water, this time we hear about food. What are you all thinking?
I think they're missing all the good stuff they had. They remember it fondly. They've forgotten all the bad stuff. It's just, oh, that was just wonderful. But they're complaining now because they miss all that good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me think people haven't changed.
Say more.
Well, I mean, it just seems today people find more to complain about than they do to be thankful for. And it just seems to be sort of a human characteristic, is that, you know, you see discomfort much much more easily than you see pleasure or thankful.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like the minute this battery plant, Ford's going to build a battery plant down near Marshall.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you know, and they buy 3,000 acres of land. I mean, you know, and they start digging the footing, and all of a sudden the people who live there don't want it and are trying to block it. Yeah, so just seems.
Yeah. Oh man, my family's caught up in that one. Logan's family lives in Marshall, and they've been in the hubbub, and it's interesting when I think one of the things that is interesting is like what nostalgia does to our conception of how things are today, because they remember when Marshall was this booming little town. It was like quintessential America. And it's not that. There's a lot of poverty in the city, and there's an opportunity for jobs, for money to flow in, and still there's complaints, and it's interesting.
You know, it's always things just aren't like they used to be, you know. I mean, I don't know why we have such a great tendency to look backwards rather than looking forward and saying, what can we do given the situation as it exists now to make it better? You know, where they just bemoan that things aren't the same. It's not so good.
Yeah. Let's spend a little bit of time on that, though. What is it that makes any hypotheses on why it's easier to look back with rosy-colored glasses? Yeah, Mary Ellen?
Well, you don't have to do any work. If you're looking forward, you have to make change. You have to work toward a new goal. You have to put in time. You have to put in effort. You have to put in your creativity. It's work to move forward. But to look back, it's just reminiscing and griping and complaining and stagnant.
I think we resist change of any type. We don't want to change. As Mary Ellen said, it's easier. Just leave things as they are.
And we know what the past was, or at least we think we do. Often our recollection may not be that accurate, but we don't know what the future is. You can't predict the future. So that's an unknown, and that's what makes it scarier.
Yeah. Mary Ellen?
Well, I'm relating all of this discussion to our church. And we have made the effort to move forward, to change with the times, to look at what possibilities are, but that's a lot of work. There's still some conversation back to when Mac was there or when this was like that, but I don't feel people are trying to recreate those days of the church back in the beginning days. But our discussion this very minute reminds me of what our church has gone through.
Yeah. So I have to say, one of the interesting images in my mind of thinking about nostalgia and looking back and kind of remembering the good and not always remembering the hardship. It was last summer I went to Dollywood, which was a lot of fun. And Dollywood has one of those places, and I think a lot of theme parks do, where it's almost like a 1950s town as people remember it, with the old school like soda shops and the old movie theaters, a few old cars, and that like good old like what we kind of think is like the America of our imagination is that 1950s white picket fence. And there's a nostalgia of that time, of a time of prosperity, of a time of like when things were good. And it's always fascinating to me that those like mock 1950s towns don't have like drills of hiding under your desk for fear of nuclear war. Like it has none of the elements of the Cold War in its reminiscing. It only has this like idealized small town feel. When looking back, like at any point in time, there is terrifying elements of every day and age. And I'm fascinated by when we remember the bad things and when we only remember the good things. And it seems like the Cold War is sometimes in our, like when we look back in our history, is sometimes forgotten about unless talked about directly, and like how much fear there still was. And so bringing it back to the text here, so remembering that all of this story was set into motion because the people were crying out and God listened. The Exodus is partly because the people were suffering, they were in pain, they were crying out for assistance and for help, and help has shown up. Help got them out. And now we are entering the desert, and they are struggling with how to think about what their past was when they were literally crying out in anguish and pain, and with a God that is responsive and gave them exactly what they wanted. So let's go to the text itself. So starting in verse 1, the whole congregation is setting out from the one water source, or the water source with the 12 springs and the 12 palm trees. Because they are inherently nomadic. If they stay in one place, I mean, they have theoretically their herds and their sheep with them. They can't overgraze, especially in a barren area. That yes, an oasis might be good for a while, but you don't want to eat all the plants to the roots, or else it's gonna die. So they set out into the wilderness of sin. This is an unfortunate word that is just strictly conjugated. This is not meant to be our English understanding of sin. This is literally just pure translated Hebrew. I was looking in the notes, they have no idea what this name means. So don't think of it as sin in the English sense. So anyways, they come to this wilderness area. It had been 15 days of the 2nd month after they have departed from Egypt, and they're running out of food. And so once again, the Israelite people are going to go complain to Moses. We don't have food. What do we do? But it's not just a like, oh, help us. Their comment is, if only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pot and ate our fill of bread, for you have brought us out into the wilderness to kill the whole assembly of hunger.
It's your fault.
Yeah, they're pointing at Moses for this. What do you think? I mean, this is a heavy complaint to level at him. What do you all think?
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, Marianne.
Sorry. Well, I find it interesting that in verse 3 it says, the Israel said to them, if only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the hand of Egypt. They were the ones who were passed over. They were the ones who did not experience the worst of the plagues. They did not experience the wrath of the Lord. And here now they're saying they would rather he had killed them at that time
Yep.
than putting them out in this land where they're hungry.
Mm-hmm.
Am I reading that? Am I looking? Yeah, okay.
Yep, that's about what it says.
Yeah, and the text doesn't say anything about the Israeli people themselves, other than those comments that they didn't experience this or didn't experience that. There's nothing said about, did they have celebrations of what was happening to the Egyptians or what? There's no appreciation of what's going on with the people until they get into trouble like they are here, then they're going to complain.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that is interesting. We're getting kind of the one-sided view of we're going to see them on their worst days in this text. And that's true. But yeah, they're like it is interesting that the complaint or their comment isn't that, oh, I wish the Egyptians had just killed us. It is actually that they like, oh, if only we would have died with the Egyptians in these plagues.
Mm.
So what do you think of this preference of, oh, what we're experiencing now is so hard, it would have been easier to just not exist. Like, I don't want to it almost sounds like I don't want to put in the work to get to the better place, to live the better life. Rather than put in the work, I'd rather just die here.
Die there.
Or die there, yeah.
Sounds like the story of a suicide person, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, I just can't cope. Life's it's hopeless. I should be dead.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could be that they talk just like we do. Oh, I'd rather die than do that. We don't really mean it. We just would like to express our strong feelings about something.
Almost that like being hungry makes it so we're not as intelligent as we normally are, and we go full hyperbolic.
Yeah.
Even today, when we're hungry, we say, oh my gosh, I'm starving.
Starving to death.
We're not
To
starving.
death.
Right.
So what is interesting is in like the next few sections, there it sets up this dynamic of, so the people are hungry and they complain to Moses about this issue. And the blame almost seems to land on Moses, but Moses says, why are you complaining to me? This isn't me. Go complain to God. And there seems to be this almost ricocheting of, Who's to blame? Who do we talk to? Who do we ask? Who's responsible? Who's going to actually change the situation? And so they have this complaint, they level against Moses, and then it quickly switches to God talking to Moses and telling Moses what he's about to do. I'm going to rain bread from heaven from you, and each day the people shall go out to gather it. So that's the plan. In this setup, even then, God says, I'm going to test them. I'm going to see, I'm going to do this. I'm going to feed you, but I'm also going to see how well people follow instructions. So I'm only going to give you this bread from heaven for 6 days. And on the 7th day, you're not supposed to collect, because the day before you're supposed to collect double. So we're going to see if the people can actually follow instructions. So what do you think of this plan of God setting up a situation, but intentionally setting it up to see if people follow instructions well?
Also to see if they trust him to follow through with what he said he'd do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, Gary?
Something I'm wrestling with is there's a feeling that, or I feel that God is trying to get the Israelites or the people to talk to him directly and have the confidence and strength to just talk to the Lord directly and not continually run to Moses. And I don't know, I'm just trying to figure out where I read that or got the idea or whatever, but it just seems like a constant test to stand on your own.
Yeah.
Mm.
What do you all think? Where's the dynamic between the people going to Moses versus going to God directly?
Well, they must realize that Moses is suffering too. I mean, he's not getting any more to eat than they are. And he must remember things himself, except that he knows better than to do that. He goes to God, which is the right place to go. But on the other hand, they're not realizing that he's suffering just as much as they are. Why complain to him? Maybe because he has a direct contact, but but as Gary says, maybe God is trying to get them to go to him directly.
Yeah, Larry?
Or at least he's reinforcing to the Israelite people that he is the one in charge. You know, to the Israelites, Moses is their leader. God's going to say, hey, you know, no, I'm the big kahuna. You know, I'm the one that's really in charge. I'm the one that's going to save you.
So this is one of the times where I wonder if the desire for one-on-one contact between like God and the people is kind of being filtered through culture. Because what we see is throughout the Bible, there is this interplay back and forth of like God talking to individuals and then other individuals talking on behalf of God. And very quickly it gets set up like this priestly system where the priests do things on behalf of the people, and that lasts for a very long time. And it's actually a very like Protestant thing. So like past 500 years where we say we don't need a priest, we can go to God directly. Like that is actually, in the grand scheme of biblical understanding, is a very new concept. I'm not saying that God doesn't strive for that one-on-one contact, but part of me wonders if, because our texts are written by people who are in charge, if they like to maintain their power. And so you're going to get things like Aaron and Moses being an interface. And frankly, the people, that's the system that they're used to. They are used to having people be an interface between them and the divine. So there's a cultural element, there's a power element. So I'm not saying that God isn't striving for this, but there's something definitely not going how God wants. Because yeah, whether it's like I'm the one in charge, or if it's helpful to have that one person to kind of communicate through. The people seem to not exactly be responding how God wants them to. And so Moses and Aaron tell the Israelites the instructions of like, God's going to give you bread. You're going to collect it. But in verse like 7 and 8, you hear Moses's complaint kind of shine through of what are we that you complain against us? When the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening and your fill of bread in the morning, you will hear that the Lord has heard your complaint. Remember, it was the Lord that brought you out of Egypt. It's the Lord that's going to fix this problem. Why are you coming to me? It is God that keeps answering these issues. Like, we're going to deal with God. So, but then it switches, and I'm wondering if this is once again where sources are combined, because it seems to be a little bit repetitive. So Moses says to Aaron, draw the Israelites near, like bring the people in, gather them around, and we're going to give them special instructions. And we see the reappearance of the pillar of cloud that's leading them. So they looked towards the wilderness, and the glory of the Lord appeared in a cloud, and the Lord spoke to Moses. And we get the instructions once again. But this time it's not just bread, it's bread and meat. Meat gets added in. God's going to rain down quail also for them to eat. And you shall know that I, the Lord, am your God. So what do you think? Instructions clear? People should know what to do? Problem solved?
Should
They
be.
don't,
So then in verse 13, things get going. In the evening, quails came up and covered the camp. And in the morning, there was a layer of dew. And when the layer of dew lifted, there's this little crusty stuff. And the people are asking, what is it? And one of the hypotheses is that the word manna is kind of a pun on the word, what is it? So
Right.
manna in some ways, or the etymology is a little bit messy, but one of the guesses is manna is literally, what is it? What is it is what God's feeding you, which is funny. So I did a little bit of research on this one because I know there's like a few guesses as to what manna is. And so I'm going to read you a little bit of what I found. Evidently, here we go. So we have a little bit of instructions there. So the description of manna in the Bible matches what this researcher, Dannon, found in the Sinai desert. He soon discovered that white drops on the shrub's stems were the digestive byproducts of the insects that feed on the plant's sap, known as honeydew. In this secretion, formed in the night, is loaded with sugar. The sweet liquid hardens and forms white granules and is still collected from spring to early fall in many places in the Middle East today.
Huh.
So why it exists in the morning is because it's like it formed overnight and then it hardened, and then, but because it's mostly sugar, by the time the sun would come out, the sun would melt the sap.
Huh.
All right. Now hold on here, cause I'm gonna do a little hold on. I need to stop sharing for a moment. The toolbar when I screen share was like covering my tabs. There we go. So I'm gonna show you a picture. They say that there are like 3 different types of manna now that they know of. two of them are like sap from different trees, and there's another one that is more that the like basically the secretions from bugs. So some think it's like the bugs chew holes in the stem and the sap then hardens on the outside. Some thinks it's the droppings of these animals. And so this is roughly what it looks like. What I found interesting is that the New York Times is saying that manna is appearing on certain highfalutin menus. And this one describes it as dried plants, sap excreted from tiny holes and invisible bugs, or honeydew that is excreted by the bugs itself. So some of it's just sap, some of it is out the bug's butt. And then there is a third type, which is the cocoon of one of the animals, but that seems to be based in Turkey. But it's found in extremely dry climate because it needs to ooze out and then dry up. But evidently, it's on the modern menu. So they think they know what it is. For a long time, it was a mystery what this crusty substance that would form overnight was. So the manna would form. They were given the instruction, collect as much as you need. And they were told basically every family collect 1 omer. And at the end, it says an omer is 1/10 of an epitaph. And I have no idea how much an epitaph is. So I have no idea how much they're being told to instruct to gather. But what's interesting is, or I don't know if you've noticed, there's a few miracles going around in this text. Sometimes the miracle is thought to be like the bread from heaven itself, but it seems like there's more going on, even if whether you think that there is like oats sprinkled on the ground, like cereal that God's providing in the morning, or whether it's this kind of plant sap that modern people think it is. What are some of the miracles other than just the appearance of food that are going on in this text? What are some of the kind of miraculous elements? Yeah, Larry.
Well, they make a big point about how much each individual is to get.
Yeah.
It seems the text said when it came to the end of the day, it didn't make any difference how much they collected. If they collected too much or if they didn't collect enough, what they actually ended up with was exactly 1 omer or whatever it should be. So there was a significant adjustment made in the collection amount, so everybody was equal.
Yeah. Yeah, lazy and hardworking alike all got the same amount. It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and hoarders got theirs taken away from them too.
Yes.
Chris,
Yeah.
they didn't necessarily get the same amount. They got what they needed. So small family, you didn't have the same amount as someone who had a large family, but at the end, what you had collected was enough for you.
So what is the difference there? What is the difference between having the same amount for everyone versus having what you need? Like, what do we see in our society today? Do we have as much as we need, or do we take as much as we can?
As much as we can. We still have that greed where we want everything we can, whether we're saving for the future, the unknown future, or whether we're just greedy. There are, the communes, I think, were set up to have everything equal, and everyone would help with the production of food, and then you would only have what you needed. But that's certainly not our society today.
Well, in their case, it's spoiled. If they tried to save it, didn't do them any good.
Right. So can we think of things are that we haven't, I think this is one where our culture is actually really, really bad at thinking about what is enough. So what is some ways that we see around us where we don't know when enough is enough? Can you all think of any examples? Yeah, Gary?
Well, we provide drugs to people that are addicted. I mean, that's, I know this is strange, but it's, we have cities, stations where they just provide more drugs for people that are addicted to drugs. And we kind of just accept that as, and nobody seems to care.
So that, I will say, I mean, it is an interesting example. I would challenge it only to say there's some interesting research on it that shows it of like what is effective in getting people not addicted, and there's some things that seem counterintuitive, but giving, I mean, but the underlying example of giving to people who already have, giving to people something that is causing an issue in their life, yes. Giving people more access to something that is causing harm, yeah.
I know that's not the example you wanted.
I mean, it's
Uh.
what comes to mind. It's, it is what it is. One of the
And most
examples
of us,
oh, go for it.
excuse me.
Go for
I'm
it.
just gonna say, most of us have more than we need anyway. I mean, I think about, well, food, for example. I love to cook and I get a lot of extra ingredients that I don't really need all the time, but I just get them anyway because I thought, oh, I might use it sometime. And besides, I mean, I think myself, I eat too much. I don't need all that food. I come sit down to a dinner, it looks good and I eat it, whether I need it or not. I mean, I eat it. I eat more than I really need.
I mean, in a similar sense, America is notorious for having just humongous portion sizes.
Yes.
That even a small soda at like a fast food place is huge. Our
Mhm.
smalls are other countries' larges, which is, that's where it's like, wait, do we understand enough?
Like overabundance. You can gorge yourself on anything you want if you have the money.
Mhm.
And people do that. I mean, you don't need, 3 kitchens in your house that I hear about once in a while, and you don't need you to get. It's like, I don't know. You can look all over and see that happening.
Mhm.
Well, look at the people who cannot monitor themselves at a buffet.
Mhm.
Mhm.
They take, I mean, you watch some of the plates go through and they are mounded with food, not just normal sized portions of the things they like. And I'm astounded at what people will take from a buffet. And we parked in a lot of casino parking lots over the years and would go in for the buffet, and they are fabulous displays of food, but people gorged themselves,
Mhm.
which just astounded me. But yeah, way
Yeah.
more than
That's why God insisted you only got one
Omer.
program or whatever it was, one omer of manna. That's all you got, just what you needed.
Yeah.
Mary Ellen, your comment made me think of a little quip that I saw once that said, like, there's 2 people at a pizza party and they didn't know if there was going to be enough pizza for everyone. And so one person got 3 slices, not knowing if there'd be enough for seconds, and another person got 1 slice, not knowing if there'd be enough for everyone to get firsts.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And another thing though, from someone who used to be fat,
Mhm.
one of the fears of going through a buffet line is you're going to get to the end of the line and you're not going to have enough.
Mhm.
So you obviously take twice as much as you need.
Interesting.
So what is the insecurity here? Because in the end, taking more than you need is based in fear.
Yes, I think
So
so.
so getting to the end and not having enough, that is one fear. What are they afraid of in this text? Why is it scary to only take one day's amount of manna?
You're already facing starvation.
Mhm.
If you only take what you need, you could be starving again tomorrow.
Yeah.
Mhm.
To that trust thing and just say that, they don't, yes, they got food today, but they're not sure that the Lord will provide for tomorrow. And so they felt the need to stock up, but then they got their comeuppance when it all disappeared in the evening and they had nothing that they could carry over except on the sixth day. So even those who took more than their share didn't accomplish anything because it was gone overnight. So, um,
So this is why this is Chris Hallam belief that at a certain point, and granted there is kind of a threshold where I think it's unfair to apply this to people who are in poverty, but at a certain point, being poor and being rich is a mindset, in my opinion.
Mhm.
That you can have all the wealth in the world, but if you're insecure, not knowing if there's going to be enough for tomorrow, not knowing if there's going to be enough or in the bank account, if there's going to be food on the table, that is mindset. That has nothing to actually do with the access to resources you have.
Mhm.
And trusting that there will be enough tomorrow is thinking of a world that is abundant, and looking for the abundance, looking for the ways that things will be provided for. That is a shift in perspective, and these people are not yet in the mindset of the world is abundant, our God is abundant.
right.
They are still very much in a scarcity mindset. Yeah.
Well, they have just come from Egypt.
Yeah.
They just lived through the 10 plagues. They have just come through from their suffering from the way the Egyptians treated them, maltreated them, limited their food, their resource, their whatever. They have just come from a situation where everything in their lives was controlled by someone else who was not thinking of their benefit, but of how they could be continually punished in the eyes of the Egyptians. So they've just come from that mindset of years and years and years of deprivation. So from the human aspect, I can accept some of this insecurity, some of this lack of trust that the Lord will provide when these people in their lifetimes have known nothing but being controlled by the Egyptians and the hardships that they've had to endure. So I can accept some of this from their point of view.
That's fair. Yeah.
The instructions, maybe I'm getting ahead here. There's a little twist here. It's not like every day get up and it's gonna be there. There's gonna be a day here, the seventh day, that there's not gonna be anything, or the sixth day, whatever it is.
Mhm.
And no, seventh day. So, it makes it more complicated. there's a day in the calendar here that you gotta get twice as much. Because there's not gonna be any available the following day.
True. Yeah. Yeah, Larry?
The other thing is in the Israelites' complaint, their complaint is they don't have anything to eat. And they say, hey, when we were back in Egypt, remember we sat by the flesh pot and we ate bread. We weren't hungry. You know, they don't say anything about how maltreated they were, but it sort of suggests that at least they say, well, at least we weren't hungry under the Egyptians, and now we're all starving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're gonna pick out this one detail. Never mind you that they took away the straw to make the bricks that they were forcing us to make.
Right.
We weren't hungry.
Yeah, so.
But going back to Mary Ellen, your comment, I appreciate the way you're thinking, because it is really easy to be hard on this group of people. It is easy to point out the ways they're doing things wrong. Finding compassion for them, I think, in a way, helps us find compassion for ourselves. Because, like, in your talking about, like, living through scarcity, living through uncertainty, it made me think of how my parents talked about my grandparents, and my grandfather, when he threw away an electronic, he would snip off the electrical cable because you might need it. And the thought was, or the explanation was, he grew up during the Depression. Like, and we have a whole generation of people where it's like, some things we see as excusable because, well, they went through the Great Depression. You can't hold that against them. When that was their formative years, they did live through a time that was essentially, I mean, as Gary, you said, there's going to be a time where you can't collect anything. That was the year where there was nothing. And so habits form, and they're hard to unlearn. And if you grow up in situations that are uncertain and unstable, it makes sense that some people find it really, really hard to feel secure, feel the security that they may have.
Mhm. And the strange thing is, it appears, at least to me, that it doesn't make any difference how much you have. You know, there are plenty of people that went through the Depression or went through economic hardship that, you know, are now living a life of abundance, and yet they still look at Congressman, whatever his name is, who had $500,000 in his house in cash. Well, he kept a little every year, you know, because when he was in Cuba, he didn't have enough money. Now, you know, he's got more money than 90% of people, and he still, you know, he still has that mindset. That was the reason he did it.
Yeah.
I need to correct you, Larry. He was born in the US. He never lived in Cuba.
Oh.
You gotta be careful.
Well, isn't he of Cuban ancestry?
Sorry, he's a Cuban, so we should feel
Yeah.
a little slack, but anyway.
Maybe he suffered during the Depression. He says he suffered economically sometime, and that's the reason he's saving.
Well, I think his family's in Cuba. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
So he's thinking, he said his family did that too. So that I guess maybe he's thinking of his family suffering, not him, maybe.
I mean, I'm kind of going back to the sermon series, and what we were talking about this week and last is there's a certain point where your family of origin, the family you grow up with, influences the way you see things, and how your family viewed money affects the way that as you learn to use money and then you go through the world. And so like, it's all connected. Yes. So there's a few things that the people do wrong when dealing with the manna. The quail isn't really mentioned after saying that there's going to be meat. We assume that there was quail, but it mostly deals with the manna. So we have the first miraculous thing is like people collected what they needed, and excuse me, and it kind of leveled out to each what they needed. And they were told, eat everything. And that is like another point where you like, there's a element of trust. Collect what you need today, and you need to eat it today. We're not going to save it. You don't need to skimp today to have enough tomorrow. You have enough for today, so eat your share. And I have to think that had to be a very sad lesson to learn the hard way. If you ate only half of your allotment to save the next for the morning, and so you went hungry only to find out it disappeared through the day, like that would be sad.
I think you'd only do that once.
Right.
If
But
only
then we have
all
this.
lessons we had to learn.
Say that again.
If only all lessons would be that easy to learn.
Right. But then the next element of it is so the 10 Commandments do not exist yet. We do not have the prescription to take the seventh day as the Sabbath. We've seen that it's already popped up a few times, and so here's the first time that we really see God say, take a day of rest. And part of resting in their culture is no cooking. Cooking was a lot more labor intensive when we don't have ovens and stovetops and canned food. Cooking is a process. So on the sixth day, gather twice as much, cook all the food you need, and it will hold for the next day. And so do double the work and then take a day off. And what we see is the food doesn't melt away. Somehow, miraculously, the dewdrops don't actually melt. There's no worms in the food they make. And still, some people go out to collect food and don't take the day to rest. And they come out empty-handed. There was nothing there to collect. And Moses and God get mad at them, being like, are you listening? So what do we think of this kind of the second kind of miraculous situation of both the prescription to rest, that is one of the first things that God is telling this group of people in this new relationship. Last chapter, God said, do what I tell you and you will nothing bad will happen to you. And this is one of the first long-standing rules that God's gonna put out there is collect food, only collect enough, and rest on the seventh day. And some people listen, some people don't. What do you think? Are we good at resting as well? Yeah, Mary Ellen.
Well, I was going to tie it to something earlier in the chapter,
Yeah,
where the Lord was guiding them day and night. And so they really were putting out a lot of exertion, and there had to be people who were just dropping, at that point. And so for the Lord to demand that they take a day of rest and stop this journey makes total sense to me. But then there are still the people who don't trust, who don't believe yet, who don't follow instructions. We know who all those people are. They do it their own way. And in this case, they got caught up short, and it's like they went hungry when they didn't gather enough on the sixth day. Some of that is human nature, but I also can see where the Lord is coming from in his demand that they rest, because they have been journeying day and night.
I hadn't made that connection, but I like that yeah, they had been traveling by the pillar of cloud during the day and the pillar of fire at night. They were getting the hell out of Dodge, but now that they're out of Dodge, we're going to do a much more human-centered rhythm. We're going to have days of work and days of rest. And yeah, you need to rest. If we're doing this for the long haul, you need to not do things at a certain point.
Yeah.
it was a good public health measure. So, and indeed, you know, many of the dietary laws and so forth at least seem to have at least some basis in public health. You know, it's a good idea not to let your food get moldy, but then eat it, you know.
Mhm. Yeah. So rest is one of those tricky things where it's interesting how rest and God's injunction for us to rest has kind of played out in history. Because this seems like a humanitarian thing. When it comes to like the actual laws of rest, they will say it's not just important for humans to, or like the people of Israel to rest, but you're supposed to let your servants rest. You're supposed to let your animals rest. Everyone needs rest is what it's saying. Like even the fields, that's the year of Jubilee, where once every 7 years, you're not supposed to plant crops in that particular field. The thought is you would rotate which field it was, but once every 7 years, you just let nature do its thing and you let the land rest. So it's almost seems the creative order of things is to have periods of work and periods of rest. But what we see is there's times, the Industrial Revolution is one where people were being ground down to a nub with no rest days, which is why church people were involved in the labor movement to get a weekend, because it's like, hey, we need to rest. And there's part of it where it's like, it's literally my religious belief that we need to let people rest. And then we have the weekend, we have the 40-hour work week, but in recent years, we've seen it creep up that a lot, or I've seen like research done that like a lot of white collar jobs are 60 hours a week, not because they're supposed to be, but because people do it to themselves. That there's a certain point where we are incentivized to do more. People with 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet because they don't get paid enough with one job. They're working like 80 hours a week at sometimes. And then we see where things are made in factories overseas, and what we see is they're not given rest. And so we have times where we seem to pay attention to injunctions to rest and times where we don't. And if we think that this is a public health measure, the question is, are we resting? Are we allowing other people to rest? And if we're not allowing other people to rest, or if we're not good at resting ourselves, that's sometimes me. I'm not always good at taking the time that I'm required to have off. I have labor intensive hobbies is one of my issues. I'm not good at just sitting and doing nothing. But it's one of those like, is there something rotting in our world? Kind of like the manna rotted or people are going hungry. What is going astray if we're not allowing people to rest? Gary, you look like you're gonna jump in.
Well, I'm wrestling with another issue, back to the basics here.
Yeah.
There's, I think, the idea of taking a day of rest has got many benefits to it, but one of them is it's a discipline, and it builds character. And I think that the message here is to take control of things and know that you don't have to, just keep grazing all 7 days, all 31 days, all 365. And I think so. There's I reflect back, showing my age, that when the blue laws, when everything opens up all the time, things keep going, and I think society lost some of its character, discipline when that happened, and it always bothered me that people didn't slow down and look where they're going. And it's just, well, anyway, I'm sorry, I might just.
No, I mean, I think that is another interesting, thank you for bringing it up. Yeah. stores that are open 24 hours now, stores that are open on holidays, it has there's the two sides of it where you're not letting employees rest, but there's the other thing of your lack of planning is affecting other people's lives. And I think the more that we allow it, that you can run out on Thanksgiving at 6 o'clock at night and pick up some gravy, that impacts other people. Your planning does impact people. Larry, you look like, did I see your hand?
Yeah, but and the other thing I was thinking, if you are in the process of writing the Bible for the church people, we're not going to provide quail and manna forever, but we'll give you a day off. Now, you don't get anything to eat, but the church is open. So that's the day you go and practice your faith and show evidence of that. And then what do? We open Kmart on Sunday instead of going to church, Can't
I
wait.
mean, that is one of the things that does impact the church landscape nowadays. I mean, cafes and restaurants used to not be open on Sunday morning.
Sunday, no.
There used to be a cultural thing where church really was the only thing that happened on Sunday morning. Now there's sporting games, now there's restaurants, there's a lot going on Sundays. Yeah. Joanne?
And what about children in schools? Games, sports are planned for Sunday mornings. I mean, there's no respect anymore for time, I guess.
And
So-
you couldn't buy alcohol before noon because the churches were open in the morning, but once noon came, church was over and you can buy all the booze you want now.
I have to tell this story because it's funny. Our son was a night person. And when he got the car, he loved to go run errands. Well, he would at night go out at 11 o'clock and expect the stores to be open so he could do stuff, and they were closed. We loved
So
Yeah, he's doing studies and then at 10, we're getting ready to go to bed and he's going out. Where are you going? He says, I need to buy some t-shirts. There's no place open, but he go anyway and then come back and that's it, fine.
So, I mean, it's interesting the balance that we have to play in this day and age, because there's something that I know that sometimes self-control is really difficult. And so it helps when you have community doing control together. And I think that's one of the powers of going to church, is that how often do we actually set time aside to pray, read the Bible, and do some of those things in worship that theoretically we could do those by ourselves. You all could read your Bible and read all the like I've given you the tools to do it yourself, and yet you come here to do it with us together. And I think there's a helpful element to that, of doing the communal thing. It helps to have that kind of accountability of each other. And at the same time, we live in an intercultural world now. Not everyone's holy day is Sunday. It's kind of unfair. Rabbi Alicia and I occasionally try to get together, and it's actually the thing that I never thought would be so hard is the fact that her Sabbath is Friday through Saturday. And so Sunday's her free day. And I'm like, girl, Sunday is my work day. And purely the religious traditions between the two of us, it's finding a time to get together at night is very difficult. But we're also religious leaders, so that adds a layer on top of it. But it wouldn't be fair to people of other cultural traditions to shut our entire society down because of Christian tradition. We choose Sunday, the Muslim day of where they do their service, I believe, is Fridays, and the Jewish Sabbath is Saturdays. There's other holy days thrown in. We can't shut it down just because we want society shut down. But at the same time, I hear a lot of people still lamenting that it's like, why do we have sports games every day of the week, possibly? Like we haven't decided on how to rest as a culture when we are dealing with many cultures and many traditions. And it looks like we're not as good as like choosing a day to let everything just kind of be quiet, except for one day. And I know this from experience because Logan and I forgot to buy groceries because I was busy on Christmas Day. I think it was Christmas Day 2020, or 2020. No, it must have been 2021, because all of a sudden we woke up Christmas morning. We didn't have cat food. We didn't have human food. And we were like, what is open? And nothing was. And I was so happy and so frustrated at the same time because I had cats that were hungry and I was hungry. And we were quickly Googling, like, what in the world is actually open? Because it's so rare for things now to everything be closed. So,
What did you? How did you feed?
The cats had some secondary backup food that they didn't like that we fed them. One of my cats decided to go on a hunger strike for 24 hours. So he's fat. He can go one day without food. He won't die from it. He was just very obnoxious that day. And then Logan and I found an Indian restaurant that was open. So we had Indian food for Christmas morning. We have never made that mistake again. Kind of like the people here, we know, even though I'm prepping for Christmas Eve, I can send Logan out to like, make sure we have enough food for the day everything is shut down. Anyways, we are just over time. I'm curious of some of your all's thinking. I said this is going to be the new pattern for a while of the Israelites complain. And my question for you to wrap things up today, was their complaint justified? Did they handle it well? Or did they handle the situation well, but was their complaint justified?
Well, partially, I think it was, but on the other hand, they certainly didn't make life very happy for Moses for a while. I mean, blaming him for all this, whereas he was suffering along with them. I think they could have shared that with him in their complaints. We know you're suffering too, but what are we going to do? How can we all counteract this and ask God for help?
So what I'm hearing is the complaint was justified, but it lacked a sense of teamwork.
And sensitivity to him.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
They were just self-centered. They were in their own little world and their own little needs, and they hadn't become a community yet. And so, following up with what Helen was saying, that they were not able to see that someone else was suffering as well. They were only aware of their own. And hopefully, although I'm guessing not, they become a community somewhere down the line. But I'm thinking that perhaps they didn't, as I think of the future stories. So.
Just seems to be human nature, because here we are thousands of years later, and we all would have the same reaction. Why did we leave?
Yeah, one of my favorite ad campaigns is the Snickers bar. You're not yourself when you're hungry. Eat a Snickers.
Yeah, right.
Larry, did you have a thought though? I think I cut
I
you
was
off.
going to say hunger is something that everyone understands. I mean, they can appreciate it themselves. So if they're hungry, they're probably going to have some sort of response, usually a complaint, to somebody.
Yes. So if we were to give them a letter grade for this situation, what would we give them?
C.
A C minus. They're not failing yet, but they're still not doing well. I guess my question is, now looking back at their first complaint, were they a little bit more reasonable with the first complaint?
Yeah.
When they were like, hey, there's no water.
Yeah,
They at least didn't pretend like they were gonna die.
but, yeah.
All right.
There was water, but it was bitter.
Yeah.
Well, next time we're gonna hear another complaint. We're gonna see how they deal with that one next time. And it deals with water yet again. So all right. Shall I pray us out for today?
Yes.
All right. Let us pray. Gracious God, it's sometimes hard to see when enough is enough. It is sometimes hard in a world to stop and look around us, or just stop altogether and have a moment with you. We see that the Israelites in this scripture, Lord, they were struggling, but we also know that we struggle too. That some of their complaints are our complaints today, and that the way they handle things is not too far off from us. So open our eyes when we truly do have enough and we are just feeling insecure. Help us be grounded in your abundance and show us that truly that you will give us our daily bread each and every day. And help us to take what we need so that others may also have enough. That those who are struggling to get their daily bread may actually be able to secure it and find the security and the abundance that you give us. And help us to cultivate our discipline. Help us to make it so we do rest, so we do take time off, so we do give our world a chance to pause and not to work itself away until it's ground into a nub. But God, we know we struggle with all of those things, so we ask that you be there to guide us, to help us, to empower us in all of these things. And we give you thanks, God, that truly you are a God that provides manna in so many different ways in our lives. And so we pray all these things in the name of Jesus, the bread of life for which we look to always. Amen.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you all. See you next week.
Yep.
Bye-bye.